vibes only on your home of intellectual swag. Welcome to it, UJFM 95.4 beats of intellectual swag. My name is Linda Khumalo and welcome to the general public affair. As you know, it is the public, by the public, for the public. And yes, it is time for us to get into African Insights. As you know, it's week 3, or rather week 4 of the African Insights. And today, I'm joined in by a lovely lady called Mathabo Tlali, if I'm not mistaken, or Tlali.
Correct, Tlali.
I guess my suit is on point. And Mr. Shabangu, who joined us on the first show of African Insights.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, I cannot hear you guys.
Hello, hi.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yes, indeed.
Are you good, Mr. Shabangu?
I'm tight, man. How you doing?
I'm well, man. And today we are talking African languages and how it also mixes up with art and decolonization and everything. So, Mathabo, I'd like to know, first things first, what makes a person African?
Oh my goodness, that is such a meaty, contentious question there. You throw me to the deep end. But I will say, for me personally, what I'm struggling with, or rather what I'm mulling with, is the idea that whilst you have an option to leave this country when things hit the fan, I question your alliance to this country and to this continent.
Interesting.
Because like when things happen here, when civil wars happen, people can instantaneously identify relatives in Australia, identify relatives in Germany and London. I'm Mathabo Tlali and I'm here. Right?
You
this is my beginning. This is my end. To quote Mzwakembuli. I'm still mulling with that, but then understanding very well that we have allies within the continent. What does that then mean for them? What does then that mean for situations where people are products of interracial relationships? Right? When you are Xhosa and your dad is Swedish. Right? One of my closest friends is an example of that. So what do I? How do I deal with that when I consider exactly how do I distinguish that? So it's easy for us to be poetic and say if you are allied to the things of this country, but then we have inequalities. It's nice for you to be allied when you are living in Houghton, cool, and you're living in a fancy house, and it's great to be my ally when I'm living in a shack in Soweto. So how does your allegiance look like? So it's a lot to think about, but for me personally, when things hit the fan, where will you go? Will you stay or will you go?
So it's about when things hit the fan. It's not limited. It's not limited to skin color.
For now, it's not. That's for now.
Okay, and then do you consider? I know you do. What makes you consider yourself African? Rather, make it personal. What makes you African?
Oh my goodness! When I look at my mother, there's absolutely no way that I can say that I'm not African. Looking at the way in which she raised me, looking at her character, looking at her love for isiXhosa and how it permeates through me, how it permeates through my sister, and this is without her having told us, telling us rather, to study isiXhosa. My sister is doing a degree majoring in drama in isiXhosa, which was something that I did, because in the way in which she shared her life, she's a woman from Etowa in the Eastern Cape, and we grew up in the burbs all our lives.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like that because of the values that she entrenched in us, and the people that she exposed us to. So there's absolutely no way. It starts with her for me.
And Tony, would you like to share us maybe on what it means to you being an African, or what makes you African as Tony, as an individual?
Well, I don't know how much I could add to what Mathabo has already said, but I feel like my identity, my culture, my background, where I stay, who I interact with, how I interact with these people, are all things I think identify me as African. And this is in contrast to someone who perhaps stays elsewhere in Europe, in Asia, and their relations and how they relate to people. I feel like the way I relate to people is very nuanced to where I'm from and how I speak to people, how I value people. I just think that all over the world there are different ways of doing things, and I think that my way and the way I've been doing things and raised to do things is particularly African and identifies I said identified so many times. But,
it's the way of the academic. It's the way of the academic.
But yeah, I can't put my whole life in a sentence, but I
Yeah.
feel like I'd have to do that to show you what makes me African. You know what I'm saying?
You can join in the conversations on Twitter at UJFM, at Smrevzinto, hashtag the general public affair, hashtag African Insights. So let's get into the burning question this evening.
Yeah.
Does African text have to use an indigenous language to be considered African?
Yes and no. The only reason why I say yes and no, when you're writing in English, let's look at someone who writes in English, someone like Toni Morrison, for instance. A woman who writes deliberately not including any white character as a protagonist. No white person matters in her work. The black person matters. But then they matter within the context of the English language, right? So there's her, and then you have people who are obsessed with the English language where the identity is tethered to whiteness. So we have people who use the English language. Ngugi wa Thiong'o was here earlier in the year. And he spoke about how we must use the English language, but we shouldn't allow the English language to use us. So when we use this language instrumentally for our purpose, for our own good. That's the difference between the Toni Morrisons and people who feel that in order for them to be considered human, they ought to articulate themselves in this language. So for me, it really doesn't matter whether you use it or not, but the causation, what is in your mind, like what is the impetus behind you using?
So how would you describe a person used by English?
A person used by English, friend. This is Joburg. Let me take you to Sandton for 2 seconds, and I will show you black folks who are used by English. Thank you very much. I'll take you to Sandton City. Hi there. Hi there.
That's ridiculous.
Hi there.
Okay,
Right?
carrying on. I'd like to know, should we write about African issues in non-African languages?
African issues in non-African languages. I think in many senses we did answer that question. The reason is, why are we using this English language? Now, it's different when we're going to have a conversation, and it's a conversation of the diaspora. So I'm trying to communicate with other black folk who are not on this continent. In fact, before you even talk about the diaspora, we live in South Africa with 11 official languages, and the way of colonialism is such that we can't communicate without using English. So how do we use these chains for our good, right?
Yeah.
We haven't yet devised a way of speaking that is indicative of us. Now, a composition of all these 11 languages, in fact 12 considering sign language.
Yeah.
And creating our own. And there is absolutely no way we can do this in isolation. There can never be an announcement where we're like, okay, cool, black people, we are meeting here and we are going to start our own language. It'll never happen. So how do we use English for our own good and not feel pressured by it to articulate ourselves? How then can Mathabo, who visibly is a woman who code switches in conversation, I speak as a Xhosa and I speak English in an intertwined manner. So how can I write a book where I write and mid-sentence it's a Xhosa and mid-sentence it's English? Are we accepting of that? I think that then is the conversation. Can we write in the way in which we speak? Can I speak and, you know what I mean? And the speaking reflects in my writing. So there's this decolonization project needs to happen in various forms. Where even in our writing, a person can write in an essay, an English essay, or an English essay, or a philosophy essay, and they can write in both English and in the indigenous language to articulate a point.
This is very important because, I mean, as much as English is a very good vehicle for ideas and stuff, there's some things you can't articulate in English, and you definitely need some sort of alternative of expression, and that is your home language. And it's necessary to not, I feel like it's necessary to not just now say, because we are transforming and decolonizing, to completely discard of English. We, as already mentioned, we need to use it to our benefit when we can, but also not rely on it so much that it's a crutch. When we given the opportunity, yes, we should articulate in our own languages, in indigenous languages. But when we can't, English will always be a vehicle because we all understand it throughout the world. And it's just unfortunate that we have to get the message across the world. But maybe over time, if we do allow for more voices in the way we articulate ourselves, we'll have a kind of a plurality rather than just a one way of doing things. I think it's very important to have various outlets for human beings like me and you, man. We think in various languages too. It's difficult to always articulate in just one language.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting that you say we think and dream in different languages. Do you think in English, or what language do you think in?
It depends on what I'm thinking about.
It depends on what. So
Yes, so the context is very important. No.
Hi there.
But there are definite instances where my thinking is mostly driven in English, and then there are cases where I'm deep in Zulu thinking, and I don't even realize that, whoa, I'm thinking in such like deep Zulu, or just Zulu in general, you know.
And when it comes to your dreaming, do you dream in English or do you dream in Zulu?
I dream in both. And
Yeah.
like I say, the importance of the dream for me depends. Because, I mean, sometimes I dream of ancestors, and ancestors will not speak English to me. Trust me.
No.
They will not
Hi there,
speak
Tony. Could you please slaughter a cow for
Excuse
me?
me. Are you that gentleman from my family? No, sir. They tend to come to me in a certain manner, and I respond also. So it's not a given. It's very context-based, but my thinking is not like one way.
So when I'm Mathabo nana ka eng, nana ka Sekgowa kapo nana ka Sotho?
There we go.
It depends, hey? Also context.
Yeah.
But I struggled a lot at work. I struggled a lot because I'm in advertising as well, and now you're supposed to pitch something, and I'm like, I'm like, how the hell am I gonna tell these white people iti? And when in English it will turn. No, it's not. It will turn. It's not that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I do dream. I do dream, and it's because it depends what. I do dream.
So I
Yeah,
guess
in English.
within communication, there is barriers of translating certain words directly from our indigenous languages into English, or from English into our indigenous language.
I think there are. I think they're like, it's not definite, but there are some things which make it difficult for me to articulate a very simple idea, like I don't know if I can say it in that same phrasing.
Yeah.
And
With that same energy.
Yeah,
and
with
with
that
that same versus sitting under a
The
tree.
tree, you know?
There's something very dainty. You see butterflies sitting under a tree. Like you see a big, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the gravitas of what you're saying is also
Yeah.
embedded in the language with which you choose.
Yeah. And I mean,
to use.
as people who were raised in these languages, you even see like the way we express ourselves when we speak
Yeah.
these languages, that we bring in a bit of life.
It's encoded in
There's-
DNA.
Yeah, we breathe in life to it. Whereas sometimes when you use English, you gotta be cold and calculative and very specific and it takes away some of that life that you breathe into it. So it's important, Vele, to understand that there are barriers. Sometimes you will be able to say something in Zulu and then in English, but sometimes you won't.
So I'd like to know, considering decolonization, are the languages of colonial powers such as English, French, Portuguese not African?
They're not.
Okay, tell us more, myself.
They are colonial language. You see, for me, the African project needs to be unifying, but we need to be clear of how this weird unification in some instances happened, right? How did we come to, inverted commas, coexist? There's this thing called colonialization. And we need to understand who came here and which language they spoke, right? So that we don't get into a space now where I'm esteeming Afrikaans above isiXhosa, because the consequence of that would mean that I'm aligning myself with the I don't want to say the apartheid agenda, because Afrikaans is not apartheid, but I'm aligning myself to whiteness as opposed to esteeming my own people, right? So I need to have a respect for Afrikaans, but I cannot have an elevation of Afrikaans over isiXhosa, not on any which day. So we need to be careful of that, and we also need to be careful of the dynamic between white and black. We haven't yet established an equal playing field as yet. So there is a chance that in us being all dreamy and it's this huge utopia, and I'm like, yeah, I love everyone and everyone loves me and we're like living so great together, that we forget that in order for you to be here, there had to be a certain amount of violence for you to be here. And there had to be a number of violence for me to be where I am. And we need to acknowledge that. And the only way I can pay homage to my ancestors is for me to hold this language. I'm not going to live under a hut.
I'm loving
I'm not,
you, Mathabo.
I'm not living in a hut.
You
So the
calling
only
a spade
way-
a spade.
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
that. I
No,
love
No,
that.
no, no. With progress is truth. There's truth in progress. We can only progress when there's honesty. And the reason why we're constantly dealing with the same issues in our country is the fact that we weren't honest. And
Yeah.
we weren't honest about the TRC and what it meant to us and what it really did to us and the damage that it did. We weren't honest about various betrayals, right? We have Lomne and we still have Marikana hovering over us. We haven't mourned Marikana yet. We
Yeah.
can't be speaking
So,
Ethiopia.
what's your take, Tony?
No, I'm actually in all agreement. I'm in all right now. I'm just like, just taking this all in.
So you agree that English, French, and Portuguese are not African?
I feel like they aren't because they have their motherlands. You can't now England and say Africa is a little England. You can't now French and say like France and Africa is a little France. That was the colonial project, and for us to accept that, to say that like something like Portuguese or France as a particularly African language, you also
But what you're saying is a bit contradictory to what you said earlier on in terms of when we are decolonizing, we're not discarding everything.
Yes.
Of which these things are colonial. In order to decolonize something, it's a reversal of something.
Can I make my point though?
Yeah.
That by elevating these things, what we do is we kind of put out our own fire. I mean, by praising English, praising Afrikaans, praising our own cultures, then become like part of the backdrop. They become part of the backdrop, and over time, over a few generations, they extinct overall. So what I said initially is that exclusion isn't good, but at the same time, we shouldn't put something on a pedestal based on maybe its use and its pragmatic purpose for our world. It is still a problem. It's something which is still problematic, and we just live with it. But we can't say now we've accepted at like French or Portuguese as an African language.
Do hit us up on Twitter at UJFM, at Smurfzindo, hashtag The General Public Affair, hashtag African Insights. The conversations continue as we mark week 4 of African Insights on The General Public Affair. But for now, good music, good vibes coming your way.
Can we beat? Oh yeah.
How's that?
What? At the time, was just spitting flames.
What's up? What's up on another level?
You guys are hectic. That first question. Not even a young.
Hey, where are you from?
But how about what makes you African?
I thought he still gonna ask, what are you doing?
No, but come on, guys. Time is on my side.